Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Amy Anderson, and I'm the Assistant Director of Alumni Relations. Before we begin today's session, please note that there will be time for questions toward the end of the presentation. So if you have anything to ask Richard, please just click the Ask a Question button at the bottom of your screen. Please note that you may need to exit out of the full screen view in order to see the Ask a Question button. This session will be recorded and posted on our Alum Learning Consortium's past event recordings page in approximately 5 business days. Now, please welcome our moderator for today's session, Kathy Hansen, Vice President of Institutional Advancement, along with CSB SJU Provost Richard Ice.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you, all of you, for joining us this evening. I want to give a special thanks to Richard Ice, our provost, for being willing to have a conversation with us this evening and share some news about what's going on at St. Ben's. You know, the genesis for this idea of St. Ben's at home really came from the fact that all of us are staying at home more, and we're maybe not seeing the people that we care about as much as we'd like to. We're practicing our social distancing, and we thought, what better time to bring St. Ben's into your home? So we started this series with the idea that it would be a chance to share news about the college, share stories about our Bennies and the faculty who teach them, give a hint about what our future plans may be, and I think most of all, to remind everyone that the Bennie network is alive and well and thriving. So I'm going to begin today by asking Richard a few questions, and then, as Amy said, we'll open it up to you later on in the program. So Richard, if in fact you are Richard, my first question to you is, who are you and what have you done with the real Richard Ice? This is not a look I'm accustomed to.
Well, yeah, this is Richard at home. And the series is St. Ben's at home, and this is Richard at home. I know I have a reputation of being dressing like a dandy who has his bow tie and fancy socks. I do love to dress up, but at home, I'm more casual, and I do a lot of things around the house, and I wanted to come and show you what I look like when I'm at home.
Well, thank you, Lumberjack Richard. It's really nice to have you this evening. I appreciate it. Now, we just learned today that the next interim president for St. Ben's was announced. Lori Heyman, who's currently the president at Mount Mercy College in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, will begin on July 1st as St. Ben's interim president. You and I both served on the search committee, so we got to know her a little bit as during that whole process. But I'm wondering, hearing from your perspective, what really impressed you about Lori?
Well, first, everybody should know, Lori has a connection to the College of St. Benedict and to St. John's. She worked in student development as her first foray into higher education at St. Ben's. Her 2 sons went to St. John's. In fact, one of the sons had me as a faculty member. I remember having him in class. But during the interview, Lori is one. She's a very genuine person, and she impressed me as being very thoughtful and being very strategic. And she's going to be the kind of person that is going to be very important transitional person. She understands that this is a transitional position with bringing both presidents together as that announcement had come out. So I think she's going to be really a good person to work with, very strategic thinker, very careful thinker, but a very fun person. I find her very, very interesting to talk to. What about you?
Well, I thought she was fantastic. Her professional background and her expertise, of course, is in student development and also enrollment. So though that area of expertise is going to be extremely helpful to us. So that was really good to hear. I'd have to say, one of the things I was really impressed about was the way she could really articulate the value of a college for women and the importance of lifting up and strengthening St. Ben's identity, as a college for women committed to the leadership development of women. And that's something we on the search committee were very explicitly looking for. And I thought Lori just had that in spades. So I'm excited to work with her. And I think for those of you who are listening, I know there will be opportunities in some way, shape, or form in this next year for you to get to know Lori. And she's very warm, and as Richard said, very funny. And I think she'll connect with our alumni and friends really well. So yeah, so we're excited to welcome her, and hopefully we'll be having one of these sessions with Lori Heyman someday.
Yes.
Now, I know that everyone who's listening right now is probably wondering what's going to happen this fall at St. Ben's. There are a lot of variables. We get new information from the state or from the feds sometimes every day, and that can change our sort of calculations about what teaching and learning at St. Ben's should look like in fall. So I'm wondering, as best you can see now, Richard, what do you think fall is going to look like for our Bennies when they come back?
Well, I probably should answer this question honestly, which is I wonder what the fall is going to look like, because it's very difficult right now because things are moving so quickly with this virus, and knowing what is going to happen is difficult. So one of the things we're doing is we're not going to predict what's going to happen, but we're going to plan, and we are planning for various scenarios and trying to figure out how we can adapt. And the president's put together a team and charged me with leading it for the different scenario and fall planning. We meet daily for an hour and a half, and then we meet in our separate teams. So we are doing lots of planning, working with lots of different groups. And, you know, we're watching the Minnesota Department of Health, but we're not just watching it. The Minnesota Department of Health has a higher education task force that's made up of 9 different groups. And we actually have members on each of those groups from the College of St. Benedict and from St. John's who are actually part of the discussion and making those protocols.
Okay. So with so many variables, I mean, you have to commit to planning something, right? And with so many variables, it's got to be hard to kind of weigh this good against that good, this challenge against that challenge. So I kind of wonder how do you navigate that complexity? And, you know, maybe there's some guiding principles or core values that sort of kind of support that decision-making process. So how does that actually work?
Yeah, well, you know, the first thing we did was we sat down and said, okay, what's the range of scenarios? And it was everything from, okay, this is over and we start as usual to we can't start and everything in between. And so we looked at all those scenarios. And then we sat down with all the vice presidents, and you were there at the meeting, I remember, and we talked about what are going to be the decision-making rules that we're going to follow. And first and foremost is prioritizing the health and safety of the community. And so we make sure that we can work with the healthcare professionals, and we're always watching what are the best practices that we need to be doing to make it a safe campus. And it needs to be safe for students, it needs to be safe for faculty, it needs to be safe for staff, and it needs to be safe for the sisters. So mindful about all of these safety concerns. We also know that our strength is in the in-person education. And how do we educate the whole person? We did go online, but we know that isn't the experience that the students want and the student expect. So how can we have a plan that gets us in person and focuses on the learning goals and the learning experience we expect and is flexible? So it's got to be flexible and integrate the technology that we have. So those were the main things we were looking at.
Well, you mentioned the safety of the community, which is so important, of course, because of the monastery, but also I believe over 30% of our faculty are over the age of 60. And I think over 20% of the entire faculty and staff are over the age of 60. So we have to be very attentive to the demographics of who's on campus. And
Yes.
plan for that. It also, of course, we talked with Mary Geller last week, and of course, we talked some about what student life can be like, in this fall scenario. So I know that factors into it. There are financial repercussions. There's enrollment repercussions. We'll be talking with Nate Daney, our Vice President for Enrollment next week, who can talk about how we navigate these challenges right now. So it's a complex and comprehensive process for sure.
Yes. Well, and I'm glad you mentioned student life, because we're partnering. Academic affairs and student life is partnering together, because we know that we can't have the schedule that we have now and have it work. And so how do we partner with student life to make sure that if we're on campus and we're planning to open up and be on campus in person, but how do we use the protocols? The protocols in the classroom are only going to work if students are also using the protocols in the dormitories and things. But we also want to make sure students have the experience that they come to expect, and the community.
Yeah, that's interesting too. So we went online really in a hurry, right? It was sort of amazing how we pivoted so quickly, this past spring. And so delivering kind of emergency online education. How does the way we were teaching this spring, is it comparable to just how, any online university, like say Capella or something like that, is what we were doing like that? Or was there something distinctive and St. Ben's focused about even our online delivery these past few months?
Yeah, that's a good question. And no, it's not like an online program that students would go that's purely online. We had to accommodate a lot of students. Some classes were asynchronous, some were synchronous, some were a combination of the two. I know some faculty told me they had to go asynchronous because St. Ben's is an international campus now. I mean, we have students from all over the world. And so a faculty member who had, a quarter of her class was
from China,
actually went back to China and Japan. And then another group of students were from the East Coast and some from the West Coast. And so synchronous was very difficult for everybody. So we have been using technology for a while. And so a lot of classes have been using the flipped classroom, where the lectures were online and the students come into class and they do the chemistry problems or the math problems, and they do the subject in the class. So we've been doing this. We've had software that the faculty have been using for various kinds of things that they do. So it's not completely different, but we're an online campus. They usually hire their faculty just to teach that particular class. We actually have faculty who are experts who are doing these things and have terminal degrees and are paying attention to the students. And so we expected the faculty members not just to teach the class, but to also be interacting with the students. One thing I think we have an indication that the faculty was interacting with the students is we were worried how many students were actually going to enroll for the fall semester.
Right.
And we actually had numbers that are comparable to what we always have. And it looks like our retention numbers are going to be as good as normal. So the faculty was reaching out. And those kind of retention numbers don't just happen because they passed the class, but they wanted to, the faculty member was there and keeping them in community. Now, I would add one more thing that we did. We surveyed the students and the faculty to find out what worked and what didn't.
Okay,
And
so what did you learn?
Well, we learned that the students don't like being online and they want to be in person. We also learned that it was very stressful for the students to teach, to have 4 classes at the same time. It was very difficult to have that. And we also learned from the faculty teaching 3 classes, which is the faculty load, was very difficult too. the students were saying they wish they could focus on a class so that they knew, okay, this class is definitely synchronous. I know that, and I know the kind of platform, and so it wasn't as jarring. And so that went into one of the key decisions that we have made.
Okay. So it's informing what the schedule is going to look like this fall.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And I can talk about that if you
I would
like.
love to hear you talk about that right now, because I think it's very interesting.
It's very, yes.
Yeah.
Looking at all the possibilities, we have come to the conclusion that the best possibility for us to be online and the best way for us to teach, the best way for us not to be online, but the best way for us to be in person, and the best way that if we have to go online to be online, would be to go to a block system for next year.
And what does that mean exactly?
Well, it means that the students would take one class at a time. So they would take one class and focus on that one class intensely, and devote all of their energy to that class. Now, here's the advantages of that. No, we already have the semester separated into 4 mods. So it's already naturally separated into the students taking those classes. We'd also have some 1 and 2 credit classes that would be within the mods or across the mods. And we're working on some subjects like music, where those would run more across the mods. But if a student is taking a mathematics class, they would only focus on the math class. And the faculty member would have the class for 3 hours. It wouldn't be 3 hours of lecture. It'd be different kinds of things going on. We also are instituting a hybrid flex teaching model for the fall, which is all of the classrooms now are going to be equipped with video and audio, so that the faculty member will be teaching in person. But let's say a student gets sick and can't be there, or the faculty member is sick, then some students could be online and be in the classroom at the same time. So that would be, that's also an advantage, and flexible, so that the class could be moved online and back in person. So we're being responsive, and we're doing this in a way that is researched. We're going to be bringing in experts who teach in this way, and they're going to be running workshops as soon as the middle of June and throughout the summer to prepare the faculty. We're going to be working with the students. We're meeting with the student senates tomorrow to talk about this, so that they understand this. It also means something that we planned? No, but COVID, you have to make some choices, right?
Well, it's an interesting model. So you have 8 basically kind of single units throughout the year, one class of, I suppose, 3.5 or 4 weeks, something like that. And so if a student needed to, perhaps, was sick and had to back out, they maybe only miss 1 class rather than getting behind in 4 classes at time. So there's a lot of flexibility in that as well.
That's right. Well, and even on campus, we're going to have to practice social distancing. We know that. What's the place where people don't practice social distancing? On the link, the bus. We've got a funnel, right? So if we can reduce the number of movements from students in a day, that will help us with the health and safety. And that's another variable in this.
That's really excited. And I've heard you mention that you're hearing from some faculty who are actually kind of excited about what the possibilities of this particular kind of calendar might offer up. So
Right. And actually the faculty is rolling up their sleeves, just like they rolled up their sleeves to make the transition. I mean, we turned a barge on a dime in March. We turned it, and I can't thank the faculty enough for all that they did. They made sure that they got online. We prepped everybody. We had some ongoing work with faculty and some support groups to talk about how to make things better. Was it perfect? No. do we got some things we got to fix? Yep. And we're going to do it.
Well, it's exciting to think about. And higher ed is not exactly known for being quick and nimble in making change. And so it was kind of nice to, belie that kind of understanding of who we are. So that's good. You mentioned earlier the technology needs and changes that were happening in the classrooms. And that makes me think about what might be happening right now and throughout the summer to be ready for all of this. I mean, what what's going on campus to be ready?
Yeah, that's a good question. And immediately when we had to go online, we started talking about this. When we had the scenario planning team, we did an immediate assessment of the technology in every classroom.
Okay.
And then IT worked with academic affairs, and we started talking about what's the technology we need in these classrooms. We started talking to faculty, what you would need if we had this kind of hybrid flex model. I'm pleased to report that our IT director, Casey Gordon, met recently with all the IT directors of Minnesota private colleges and found out that we're way ahead of everybody. We've already put the order in for all the equipment and have a plan to actually put the equipment into the classrooms this summer. So it's going to happen within weeks that we're going to be upgrading all of these classrooms and getting them ready.
Well, and I'm sure it helps that we've just recently completed renovation of so many of our academic buildings, the main for sure, but also some of our other classrooms as well. So they're much more up to date and kind of amenable to this flex kind of learning.
Well, and another interesting thing is, and you and I worked a lot together on some of the upgrades that we were doing to the classrooms and to the library at Clemens Library. So, but one thing that you and I partnered on was a donor who was interested in accessibility services.
Right.
And that donor ultimately gave us a generous gift for the program is called Starfish. We've renamed it the Hive.
Okay.
It's an electronic platform for us so that faculty, students, staff, coaches, everybody can be in contact with one another about students and student learning. So let's give an example. A student isn't showing up to softball practice. And the coach says, I wonder what's going on. The coach puts out a message that says the student isn't showing up. All of a sudden, a faculty member says, wait a minute, the student didn't turn in something. Now we know we need to go and check on that student and see what's going on, right? Because we're all interconnected and talking about this. But it's also a good way for us to identify high-performing students because we're able to give kudos to students and faculty get to see, wait a minute, this student is doing exceptional in all their classes. And these faculty are pointing out, this student has a real talent for certain kinds of things. And we can start to mentor students for external fellowships, right? It could be Fulbrights, Trumans, and we're using it to identify students and say, this is a student that we should really mentor in these ways. It's a fantastic system, and it couldn't happen without the partnership with you and the donor.
And the donors. Thank you for mentioning that, Richard. And I would actually say to all of you who might be listening, I think many of you, perhaps all of you, I don't know, have made gifts to our Illuminating Lives campaign along the way. And we've been able to do these kinds of upgrades and really be much better prepared to address this pandemic than we would have been 5 years ago, even. So that's terrific.
The upgrades we've had and the Hive, having those things made this easier. It wasn't easy, but it made it better for us. Yeah.
So I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about something that I think has been around for a while, but I think the pandemic has amplified. And there's a lot of conversation out in the public about the value of higher education and maybe particularly the value of a liberal arts education. And I think that's, getting even more significant as the pandemic is, causing economic challenges for families and things like that. So I'm wondering from your perspective, how do you articulate the value of a St. Ben's education when much of the world around us is telling us that is out of date, it doesn't matter, there's more important and better ways to be educated? How do you respond to that?
Well, I think this pandemic is a good example of why a St. Ben's education is necessary. This pandemic, yes, we need healthcare to help us with this, but it's not just healthcare that's going to solve this pandemic. I mean, we have to use psychology to change behaviors. We have to use theology to talk about a lot of the moral decisions that we have to make and choices that this pandemic is forcing us all to make. We have to use economics because this pandemic is wreaking havoc on the economy. So we have to know economics and what that means. We have to know sociology so that we know how this pandemic is affecting different cultures and how different cultures are responding to this pandemic. My field of communication is important because it's key to communicate to everyone what the protocols are. How do we
have to be able to integrate all of those things you've been talking about, right? And
that's exactly right.
And the ability to think critically, which is one of our hallmarks, I'd say, is really important as all of this information is coming in, not all of it from reliable sources, right?
Yes, yes. And I keep reminding the students, you're going to change careers a couple of times, not just jobs, careers. And we have to prepare you for careers that we don't even know exist, right? Look, you can tell from my beard, I'm an old guy. And, when I was in college, a web designer was a spider. So if you said, if you said you're going to study web design, they thought you were a biologist who was studying spiders. So we didn't know anything about this, but I now have to use the internet all the time. Look, in this at home, all of my meetings are Zoom, just like we're doing tonight. So we have to prepare students to think critically and to be bold in their life, to be willing to be women who are going to lead. That's what we have to have. And that's what society needs. We need to have that kind of education. And even our education that focuses on careers, let's say nursing, for example. Someone asked me about our nursing program, and I said, well, let me make something clear. If you want to come to St. Ben's to learn to become a nurse, then you shouldn't come to St. Ben's. But if you want to come to St. Ben's to learn to be a leader in healthcare and become a nurse who's going to lead, then this is the place for you. And that's what we try and do.
So the pandemic, far from sort of diminishing the importance of what we do at St. Ben's, actually has heightened, why we need to be doing what we're doing and the importance of our graduates. Absolutely.
And it's very short-sighted just to look at education as giving me that first job.
Right. Yeah. Well, that brings up kind of another issue for me, and that's really talking about kind of how some of the faculty have made these pivots, right? They're used to have been trained, have honed their expertise in kind of direct face-to-face teaching. What are they doing differently now? And have you seen any kind of creative ways that faculty have responded to the challenge of online teaching, or even anticipating what might be happening this fall?
Yeah. Well, I can tell Claire Haig in the political science department was talking about the pandemic and responses. And she was able to bring experts, one of them from Australia, into her class over Zoom.
Great.
And because she knew this person, and she was able to have this conversation. So I know a lot of faculty are doing those kind of things. Let me give you another example of how we're different. Is immediately it became apparent that we had to stop doing our fine arts program.
Mm-hmm.
And then later it looked like, okay, the fall, I don't think we're going to be able to have the kind of fine arts programming that we normally have, because I'm not going to be able to fill the Benedict Arts Center. We're not going to be able to have things in the small theater because we have to have social distancing, and some of the plays we would be doing, or some of the performances, they can't even social distance.
Right.
So I immediately met with Tanya Gertz, who's in charge of fine arts programming, and we started reaching out to some of the performances and saying, okay, are you willing to do some work with our students, to do residencies, online residencies?
Okay.
So some of these we're going to match up with some of our programming, and it's not just the fine arts departments. It's also departments that use fine arts in a way to educate their students in a different way. And so how can we do this? So we're going to try and get some digital performances, but also get these performers connected with our students in the classroom. And so it was thinking differently about it.
That's great. I know just another example of that. I worked with Matt Harkin in our English department, who received a very generous grant from the Manitou Fund to create a summer writers workshop where we were bringing in nationally known writers to mentor, students who receive fellowships. And of course, that whole model has changed, but we're still doing it online, and students are still having the experience, but they're having it virtually. So it's been wonderful to see how people have responded creatively.
Well, I remember when he responded. Well, I remember when he sent me a message and said, can we do this? And I said yes. And my job as provost is to stay out of the way of faculty innovation. Right?
Let them do their thing, and it's amazing.
That's right. That's right.
Well, it leads me to ask about something that's kind of big that's happening this fall, in addition to kind of developing a new kind of modes of teaching and learning and a new calendar. We're also starting to roll out a brand new curriculum. And that's in and of itself quite a big deal. And so layering that on top of all of the other changes has to be a challenge. So I'd like to talk a little bit about how you do that, but also, and maybe more importantly, tell us about, what makes the new curriculum better, what makes it the right curriculum for St. Ben's and St. John's now.
Well, the faculty went about this in what we call a backward design. Usually what we did with the curriculum is we'd say, okay, what are the classes we want the students to take? And then we put these classes together, and then we say, okay, you had all these classes, you had a liberal arts education. And we were finding that some students were graduating, and we say, what's a liberal arts education? Well, I took a math class, I took a psychology class, I took a theology class, and there you have it. And we were realizing they weren't integrating it. And so what we decided was, what are the key learning goals that we want these students to have? Well, we want them to be globally educated. We want them to be leaders. We want them to have critical thinking skills. And so what are the skills we want the students to have? And then how do we put together a curriculum to make sure they have the skills? And the skills aren't necessarily just in one particular field or class.
Okay.
The skills.
What's an example? What would be an example?
Well, for example, writing. That's not just English classes. It's not just humanities classes. It's other. So classes are writing intensive, but they can be in multiple disciplines, mathematics or science, right? It may not be just in a science lab class. It may be in another kind of class that's teaching the scientific method, because that's what we want students to understand and learn. So we started with what we wanted students to learn and know, and then we put the curriculum together. But it's all about connections. It's also using technology. We're going to have a portfolio, electronic portfolio, so students are putting their work in.
Mm-hmm.
And the students at various points have to reflect on their work and reflect on what they have learned. So here was a writing sample when I was a first-year student. Here's a writing sample now that I'm a senior. Wow, here's what I learned.
Right.
And it's going to help the students when they go out to employers to say, here's what I have learned as a liberally educated woman at the College of St. Benedict.
Well, and so many of our students are involved in, experiential learning, whether it's internships, research assistantships, and all of that, I assume, becomes in some way a part of that portfolio. And
that's exactly right. And that's part of the curriculum too, is the experiential learning, learning inside and outside of the classroom. That's key.
So you'll have a different way of rolling it out, obviously.
Right. But and that's been, some people have had that concern, but faculty are saying to me, you know what? A lot of these classes haven't taught yet. So if I teach them on a block, or if I don't teach them on a block, that doesn't matter. We've developed the classes. We know what we're trying to do. We know the goals we're trying to achieve. So that's what's important. And we will work around the assignments to make sure that we're accomplishing goals.
Well, congratulations on shepherding that whole curriculum process, because I know it was a big process, a big deal. Now, I want to make sure we allow time for the audience to ask some questions. So I have one final question before we turn it over to our to the audience.
Yeah.
And it's the hardest question. It is, Richard, do you prefer Bennie bars or chocolate lava cake?
Okay, that's an easy one.
Okay.
Chocolate lava cake, and it has to have a scoop of vanilla ice cream.
Excellent. No arguing with that. So with that, Amy, do we have some questions from the audience to share?
Yes, we do. Our first one is from Chad Marloff, and he asks, Richard, does a block schedule as well as a high flex delivery model cost more to implement?
The high flex costs a little bit more because we need more technology. The cost is going to be in the human cost of the faculty pulling this together, not really the actual cost. I think the cost would be if we didn't do the block and we had to go online, and it, given what students were telling us, we couldn't deliver the kind of education that we wanted. The other cost, I think, is in a key issue for a Benedictine education, which is community.
Right.
First year students, if we have to go online, and I hope we don't, but if we do, if the student is with one faculty member, then that one faculty member is monitoring those first year students all together, and those first year students have the same cohort for that time. And so it's a way for us to build community. And so I think the cost to community without the block could be serious.
Thanks, Richard.
Yeah.
Other questions, Amy?
Yes, and I do want to remind everyone too briefly that if you aren't seeing the Ask a Question button on your screen, exit out of full screen view, and it should be on the bottom of your screen. So our next question is from Carol Thielen, and she says, thank you, Kathy and Richard, for your leadership through this pandemic. You've been fabulous. My question is, what has been the financial cost for CSB due to COVID in addressing and preparing the campus for the issues you face?
Well, there have been financial costs. Certainly, when we went online, we had to refund students their room and board funds, so that, and we also had to refund some money for some programs. So there has been a financial cost. There was also a human cost, but what we're doing in the group that I'm leading on the scenarios is looking at how we deal with these financial costs, and how we try to overcome those and do things differently.
Mhm.
Try to change and try not to harm what is the core of what we are doing. Certainly, when we went online, we made sure that the faculty and the staff in academic affairs still had the resources they needed to be able to devote to our students and their education. So we have to do that. So we're still getting our hands around what exactly that is. We have a range of what that cost could be in the fall, and it all depends on what happens with COVID and what happens there. Yeah.
I have to jump in now and take this. First of all, thank you, Carol, for asking that question. I would have to say that one of the most important things that those who care about St. Ben's can do right now is to support the annual fund, which is really where that money comes in that's most flexible, that allows us to cover these unanticipated expenses and loss of revenue that is a result of COVID-19. So I'm encouraging everyone, thank you if you've already made your annual fund gift. If you haven't, encourage you to go to our website, givecsb.com, and consider making a gift. I'd also want to thank everyone who gave for the student emergency fund also, because of course our students incurred unexpected expenses, and alums and donors just responded incredibly generously.
Yeah, and I'd like to thank everybody for that too. It was very important. I'll give you a specific example where it was very important for academic affairs to have that money. As you know, one of our signature programs is study abroad. And we had students abroad when this crisis hit. And we had to get them home. And we did it in an orderly fashion. And I can say we got every student and every faculty member home. It was a heroic event from Kevin Clancy, who runs the study abroad programs through the Center for Global Education. But some students had some issues that they needed some help. We helped them all, regardless of whether we had the money. But then that student emergency fund helped me with some costs that we had with the Global Center in making sure we got everybody home. And we got everybody home and everybody safe. And the most difficult and gut-wrenching decision for me was being the first provost to ever have to bring students home en masse for study abroad. It was the right thing to do, though. We had to do it. And the other difficult thing was making the decision that we weren't sending students abroad in the fall. And we did that before any other school. And it was the right decision because our students then were able to enroll in their classes and everything seamlessly. Other schools are still trying to figure this out. But what was interesting was because we're a leader in global education, the moment I made that decision, all of a sudden, other schools, boom, 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 boom. So St. Ben's already made that decision, so we're going to have to make that decision.
Good.
But thank you to everybody for helping us.
Thanks, Richard. Amy, more questions?
Yes. Richard, how did you feel a couple weeks ago when you were at home instead of at commencement ceremonies?
That was very difficult that day. Very emotional for me. My two favorite days are commencement, but actually there is one day that's more important to me, and that's the first day. And being the provost and before that the dean, I miss being in the classroom on the first day. And there might be some of my former students watching, and they know that I'm so excited and pumped to see students. And I always wanted to teach first-year students, and there are literally hundreds of students out there that I was the first professor they ever had because I taught the 8 o'clock class for the intro classes on that very first day of class, and it was very emotional for me. But you know what was very exciting was seeing on social media students putting on their regalia. We made the decision that we couldn't have commencement, but let's make sure we send regalia to the students. And that was clearly a meaningful thing for these students to put on the regalia on the day that they were supposed to graduate, and have a picture with families that they were living with, not just an extended family, but sharing those moments. So it was a difficult day, but I also was reminded that that's not, and I've talked to students about this. I actually talked to some of the student leaders about this. That's not the day that defines us. That's not the day that defines your St. Benedict's experience. Your St. Benedict's experience is defined by some larger things. You'll look back at this moment. It is something that you have endured. It is something that is, and how you as a student respond to that moment is going to define your character. And it's an important thing to remember. It was a difficult moment, but it's also a learning moment.
We will be bringing the class of 2020 back next spring, early summer,
yes.
To do some in-person celebrations of all of this too. So
yes,
we will get to celebrate as a group.
And I'm looking forward to that. Yeah. I'm really looking forward to that.
Mm-hmm. Amy, more questions?
Yes, this one comes from Mike Morey, and I know that we'll have Nate Daney on next week, but who will also be able to touch on the retention side of things on this. But Mike asks, how much of an impact has COVID-19 had on enrollment for fall 2020?
Well, I'll let Nate talk about the enrollment for the incoming class. At least for the continuing students, it looks promising. And it looks like our retention rates are going to be in the historical range. So I'm pleased about that. However, this is something else that I know that St. Ben's alums and friends are stepping up, is making sure that we have the financial support for students whose parents have lost their incomes, who have some challenges in getting back, and making sure that we have a way to help people, help our students get back and can have the experience that they need. So at this point, it looks okay, but Mike, I can't guarantee it. Just like everything in COVID, it changes by the day. And I remember telling the faculty in a faculty meeting, I said, you've been so patient with me because I will make a decision on Tuesday, and by Friday that decision has to change because things have changed so rapidly.
I think Nate would really emphasize that students, whether they're returning students or our incoming students for this fall, really want that in-person experience, educational, face-to-face educational experience. And so the fact that you have been at work developing ways to safely offer that is really huge. And that seems to be, in addition to making sure that we're able to provide the financial support that students need, being able to say, we're making every possible effort and being creative in how we're looking at the school year to ensure that we can have that face-to-face experience. That will make a big difference for enrollment.
Well, and I'm sure that this question came up because on a normal year, we know what the enrollments are at the end of May. But because when COVID hit, we gave all incoming students till June 1st to make their commitment. So this is the equivalent to the last week in April. So we're seeing those numbers coming in, but we don't know yet until Monday what the incoming class really is going to be.
While we're talking about this, I'm sorry to jump in, Amy, but there's a question I think might be interesting. One of the other changes that we made this spring in recruiting a class was to go what's called test optional. And I wonder if you could explain what that means and why it makes a difference.
Well, we've been looking at this for a number of years. Do the ACT and SAT really give us an indication of the student's success? And this year, it became clear that for the students that would be applying next year, they probably are not going to have ACT and SAT exam scores because the ACT and SAT suspended giving these exams. So the faculty, through a lot of research, decided, we're going to go test optional. And when it came up for a vote, by the time it came for a vote to the faculty, they decided, you know what, we think that it's okay to send these test scores in, but for the foreseeable future, we're going to do a trial here and see how it goes if we're test optional for a few years. And if we don't see any difference in the quality of the students that we get, then this may not be the best measure. And I can say, working with a lot of students, some students do not test well. And a student who has dyslexia probably has a very high IQ and is very much able to perform, but not perform on a test. And okay, in terms of our liberal arts education, one thing we do teach our students is in life, you don't get a multiple choice test. When COVID hit, I would have liked to have been told, all right, here are your three choices, A, B, C. Which one is the right choice? What we had to do is figure out what the choices are. And that's what a liberal arts education is all about too.
Going test optional too, I think has been shown to also help create a more diverse, student body, which is obviously something we're very committed to. So,
right. And we're not the first. A lot of colleges are
some very prestigious colleges.
Yes, that's correct. That's correct.
Amy, more questions?
Yes. The institution is going through a lot of changes, but you've already seen a lot of changes over the years. How is teaching and learning different at CSBSJU now compared with when you started here 30 years ago?
Oh, you had to stick that in, didn't you? 30 years ago, because everybody seeing me on the screen is saying, isn't he like 36 years old, right?
Exactly. You're a miracle.
31 years that I've been here, and huge changes. When I first started, lecture was the common mode of teaching, and I saw us go from lecture to interactive teaching to group discussion, and that was a huge shift in pedagogy. I've also seen a huge shift, especially in this new curriculum, away from discipline specific toward thinking in terms of skills and what are the skills that students need to have. I'm also seeing more interdisciplinary programs. And, we have started several new interdisciplinary programs. And I think that this new curriculum has helped do that. But it was already in our DNA before that. Things like environmental studies, Asian studies, those were interdisciplinary program. Peace studies was
gender
an
studies
program. Gender studies. Programs that we just recently added, neuroscience, which is combination of biology and psychology primarily, but some other fields. Data analytics, which is getting students to think about data. But that one is important because it's not just about quantitative, it's about taking quantitative and putting it into some other areas. And I know one of the departments that's going to be part of the data analytics is history. And that's not one that you would think normally would do that, but they're thinking about having some classes about how does data analytics inform how history is taught. Exercise science, we just got that one approved. And we got some that we're looking at. In fact, one that we were starting that this pandemic now makes something that is going to be very popular, I'm sure, is global health studies. And that was something we already were starting to work on. Global health studies and sciences is going to be something we're going to look at with knowing about health sciences as well as global issues and how that affects things. We're also looking at narrative practice. We've got classes now that are looking at narrative and how that's used for therapeutic reasons. So we have some students that go into healthcare organizations and patients who are dealing with long-term diseases or terminal disease, teaching them about writing techniques and how to write about your situation and share it. We're also looking at engineering studies and how do we bring physics, mathematics, and computer science together to have those. This new curriculum, which is integrative and forcing departments to do things cross-disciplinary, is driving some of those new curricular changes. So I'm excited about all of the things that are happening at St. Ben's.
And we know that there's real demand for these programs, from our high school students and their families.
That's exactly right, because these social problems are not going to be solved by one discipline or just knowing.
Or siloed thinking, right?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Good. Amy, do we have time for one more question?
Yes, we do have time for one more question. Final question, Richard, is who do you consider your mentors to be at St. Ben's and St. John's?
Well, I've been lucky to have quite a few mentors. As a faculty member, Joan Stack was a mentor to me, taught me a lot about how to teach, what I should do. But the mentor above all mentors for me was Rita Knazle. She taught me leadership. She taught me about what it means to be a servant leader. And she taught me about being mission driven. And she taught me about having a balanced life. Rita is somebody that I hope I can be as good as the provost. I hold her up as the finest example of provost and leadership that I've ever experienced. And as a mentor, she was willing to help me learn what I needed to learn. Every year when I would have my review with her, she would sit down and she'd say, okay, here's the things you're doing well, but you know what? To get to the next level of leadership, you need to learn, when I was the dean, budgeting. So we're going to set you up with the CFOs and have you learn some budgeting. So she would identify those things. But she also taught me something that I have tried to do myself, which is a strong leader mentors his or her team, so that, she used to always say to me, if I am ever indispensable, I have failed this institution. And I keep telling my team, I need to make sure I mentor you to be better than me. And I try to put a team together that's better than me. In fact, my team is better than me. I want to say that right now. Barb May is a better dean than I was a dean. Terry Check is a better dean of the faculty than I was a vice provost. Absolutely. Ben Stomas is a better budget person as our budget analyst than I could ever be. My support staff is better than me. And that's what Rita taught me. She taught me to do that. And I hope that I can someday be as good as she.
was.
Richard, I think that's an absolutely perfect way to wrap up the questions for this evening. Thank you for that. Lovely.
And Rita was a great leader because she's a Bennie.
Excellent. That's excellent. I'm afraid that's all the time we have this evening for questions. So thank you, Richard, for taking time out.
Thank you. This has been fun. This has been fun.
Yes, it was fun. We thank you for joining us this evening. Thank you to all of you who took time out of your evening to listen with us this evening. As Richard and I log off, please stay on for some more words from Amy Anderson about tonight's episode and upcoming episodes. So thank you for joining us this evening. Goodbye.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Thank you again, Richard and Kathy, for your time this evening. Audience, you can share additional questions or comments on tonight's episode through the evaluation form that will be emailed to you by the Alumni Relations team. The next episode in our St. Ben's at Home series will be held next Wednesday, June 3rd at 7 p.m., featuring Nate Daney, Vice President of Enrollment Management and Marketing. During this episode, we'll be looking at admission strategies and updates at CSB. We hope that you will join us, and please invite your Bennie friends as well. You can find additional details about the St. Ben's at Home series on csbalumni.com/events page. Thank you all for attending this evening.